Right, I'm making another video about Gifted. This time we're going to talk about history changes. So in this video, it's not going to go over the history of Gifted like I did in the last few episodes. Rather, I'm going to talk about how we're changing the actual past from the world we live in now. So most stories, when they do things like this, when they add super characters and stuff like that, they usually work with the same history that's been given. I'm not going to do that. And the reason why is because it would just be, I would really say it would just be too easy to do that. And also, it would make no sense why history would be the exact same if people had powers. And again, I'm going with the idea that people had gifts for far longer than what most stories go for. So, again, it would make no sense if people had gifts and the history would stay the same. So, pretty much what we're going with is, let's say that this is a timeline right here of, oh dang, that line got really fat. So here we go, we got a timeline of humanity, let's say that's 0 AD, right? The really turn of the, or change of the way history is considered. So there's BC and AD, right? So I know that's pretty bad. So here we go. The way I'm going to explain things is gifts, I will say, have probably always been part of humanity since the beginning, 4000 BC. The only difference from 4000 to 0 and from 0 onward will be the frequency and the popularity. So remember that, frequency and popularity. So this is very important. That's an uppercase P. This is going to be very important because this is going to explain a lot of the backstory of really the world we live in now. So from 4000 BC, this is where you have mythology. This is where you have the story of heroes. And this is where you have fantasy elements. This is where you have monsters. And for my story, all of those are going to be in the realm of plausible. Now, I don't know if I'll ever go into stories actually describing this, but pretty much I'm going under the assumption that in this world, mythology, fantasy, and anything that's monstrous is a story and has been shared because it actually did happen. Now, of course, these stories may be exaggerated, because remember how I talked about how I didn't want, earth-shattering powers and stuff like that? So let's say you have a guy like Thor. What if you actually did have a guy whose gift was that he could control, that he had the power to control lightning? Now, in history, maybe they saw him as this great, glorious god, right? But what if he was actually just a man that instead of shooting actual lightning, he just had powers that were like it, that were like lightning? Now, it could have been visual, or it could actually have been lightning itself. But what I'm going to say is that most times history will exaggerate and distort things that actually did happen and were real. So you got things like vampires, right? What if there was actually a creature who had a weakness to the light, but was not overpowered? And the way that you go over creatures that are overpowered. Yeah?
Are you recording something? Or?
Yeah. Let me pause it. Okay. Back to that not being overpowered. So, oh geez, that is bad spelling on my part. So, but they're not overpowered. I mean, I've read enough about vampires. They're supposed to be practically invincible. And that's not how you spell invincible. They're supposed to be practically invincible. They're supposed to also be super strong, so on. But, what if they actually just had one attribute, and then everyone, as they told their story about the vampire, they distorted it? So this reminds me of the scene in Monsters, Inc., where, the little girl Boo is revealed, right? And, they claim that she could shoot lasers, right? But she never did. It was rather the hysteria that bloated the power. And I say bloated in essence of making it a lot worse than it used to be, and stuff like that. So you can have a creature whose maybe his weakness was to light, and he maybe did actually suck the life out of people. I was spelling luck. Suck the life out of people, right? So now, this can go on to explain a lot of things. So if you really think about it, let's talk about the Black Plague right now. So as I've been brainstorming ideas, because we're going to have the story center around, the Centurion, right? Because the Centurion was one of the biggest, most destructive events in human history. Well, the Black Plague, what was it? It was a disease that was spread by rats. And it killed millions. And I don't remember the percentage of the death, but I know it was between 20 to 50% of people all alive were dead by the end of it. So it really just cold the whole world. And remember how I mentioned how the Centurion killed billions and also roughly around 50%? So pretty much, let's say that someone with a gift actually had the gift of spreading disease, So what if, because according to our knowledge, it was spread by rats. What if instead, in this world, the history was changed, and we never knew what spread this disease? What if it was a person? And so that's where the idea of what I would call sub-centurions, or pretty much, I don't know what a good word would be, but pretty much influencers. Let's call them that. Now, I made that word up on the spot, so we can probably make new words instead. But let's say the guy who had this gift of the Black Plague was an influencer, right? He actually influenced history through his own actions. So rather than catastrophe playing so much as a part, oh my gosh, I'm an idiot. Catastrophe. Rather than catastrophe changing the world, what if it was gifted that changed the world? And that's where the fun comes in. So now let's think of people that we can replace in history that fit that bill. So I already talked about the Black Plague, right? So we have the Black Plague. From what I remember from world history, very influential people was Alexander the Great. You got Julius Caesar. You have people, what was his name? The guy with the heel, the Achilles heel. Yeah, so you got Achilles. I mean, yes, he's not an actual historical guy. He's, part of the Odyssey. I believe he's part of all that with Troy and all that. But, let's say Achilles actually, because think about it. We think that it's all fake because it's all mythos. It's written by Homer, right? What if Achilles actually was real? What if he actually was just a gifted human? Then you got people like Genghis Khan, or I can't spell. So you got Genghis Khan. Very influential people. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't want to belittle history by saying any extraordinary man, all of his accomplishments was because of their gifts. No. In all seriousness, these people, Black Plague isn't a person. All these people did what they did, because they were very extraordinarily smart individuals. They were very talented. Like you got Alexander the Great over here. He was really tutored by one of the smartest men alive, and that's how he became so good. You got Julius Caesar, again, extraordinarily smart, a great tactician. Achilles, he's just mythologically powerful. But then you got Genghis Khan, who was able to unite all these tribes and all that. Those are all extraordinary abilities. Now, the reason why I would call them gifted people is not to say their success was only because of gift. No. As, again, I talked about how gifts are really not that catastrophic. The thing that shows the greatness of an individual is that they have a gift and they know how to use it. So let's say all these people were gifted, but let's say their gifts weren't as extraordinary, It just shows that a man can use enough of his own talent to influence change. But also this story is, again, not supposed to say that people who do great things are only gifted. Again, we can have it say that, these people weren't gifted. But again, what I want to show is that individuals can change history. That's really the whole point of Gifted, is that individuals are strong. But the only thing that's stronger than an individual is a community. Again, every single one of these men were leaders. They were able to influence history and so on because they were leaders. They were able to get people behind them and stuff like that. And many of them did good, many of them did evil. Genghis Khan is considered a very, bad man because he's murdered a lot, but so has Alexander and Julius Caesar and so on. So the whole idea is that individuals are strong with their gifts, but they also can affect the community itself for better or for worse. And again, the wonderful thing about any type of story, when you talk about Superman and stuff like that, is that the idea of the superhero is not to belittle us. It's actually to empower us. So when we read these super stories and we want to be like these men, we don't sit there and feel bad because we aren't powerful, but rather we see them and realize that they are powerful on their own, so that we are powerful. So a good example, I think, for me is when I analyze stories, I really don't like stories where the guys are only good because of powers. Rather, I like the people who are good because of who they are, and they just happen to have a power. So think about Lord of the Rings. You got Frodo, right? Frodo has no powers whatsoever. The only thing that's extraordinary about him is that he is resistant to evil. That is not a power. But then, that's why we love him, is because he's not some Mary Sue. He doesn't need to have a power to be great. And so, when you really think about this, if Genghis Khan was just a guy with a gift, he could have got himself killed easily. But he was smart, he was creative. Achilles, same thing, but he got himself killed. So Achilles is a great example of how a gift is not that great because it can leave you weak. Julius Caesar, Alexander, and so on. Alexander, this guy partied to death, before he was 30, I believe. And that just shows, arrogance, I wanted to show how gifts are really part of the human condition. Like, this isn't an alternate human race that we're talking about. We're still talking about humans, but I'm just saying, what if humans actually did have supernatural abilities? Well, guess what? It wouldn't be as supernatural as you think it is, because, again, history's still going to follow the same suit, but people are going to still act the same way. Alexander, he partied to death because he was a genius. In this story, he partied to death because he was a genius and powerful. It really shows, like, the whole message that I want to get across is that powers are within us all. And what's really cool about that is, remember how I talked about frequency and popularity? So another thing about the story is the frequency and popularity of powers. So you got these, popular things like Thor's, vampires, the Black Plague, and so on. So powers are within us all, right? It's the whole idea that, like, what if we just didn't know we had powers? So what I think of this is, imagine a guy who was really, really gifted at playing the piano, but he never played. So how would he actually know that he was a piano prodigy if he never played? So that's where it goes. This isn't a story where if you're born with a gift, you just somehow know. You have to discover it. And so that's the glorious thing, is in this story, when I'm talking about gifts, I'm talking about everyone's individual talents, something that makes them special. And we're all special. So in this story, even though we have, 50% gifted, that actually, in my opinion, just means only 50% of people have discovered what their gift is. And that's the cool part, is then we can all theorize, like, well, what is their gift? What if their gift is just something they don't see, they don't pay attention to? And so this is all about discovery, is once the world finally acknowledges that there are super people out there, they start thinking, well, what if there are more people? So let's say there's actually a main character in the story. His name is Garrett, right? He's a soldier whose ability is that his skin becomes bulletproof only when something that's high velocity hits him. Now, let's say you were never shot in your entire life. How would you ever know that this was your gift? You wouldn't. That's the whole point. Is there are so many people out there who probably have a gift, but they just don't know because they've never been put in a situation where he discovers it. So let's say, you're Garrett and you're, a normal guy doing your everyday thing. You're never just going to, majority of people don't get randomly shot, while they're walking through the street. But let's say Garrett does. He gets shot, he thinks he's about to die, but then the bullet bounces off, right? Then he discovers, wow, I'm gifted. If that event never happened to him, which happens to most of us, like most people, 90% of people who have lived probably will never get shot, because getting shot is actually not that common. He discovers that he's gifted because of a random occurrence. Let's say if you had the ability to fly. How would you discover it if you never jumped off a bridge? Like, how many people actually jump off a bridge? Not a lot. I mean, I've never done it. I've never fell more than 10 feet. So that's the whole point, is if you had the ability to fly, but your ability to fly only activates when you fall, you'll probably never discover it unless you fall a great distance. So this is the whole point of discovery. People do not just figure out they have a gift. They have to discover it. So that's the cool thing about this story, is that it applies to everybody. Go out and discover what you like to do. Just like how I'm discovering how much I like writing this story. I never realized that I was a story writer. I thought I was an artist. And I feel like I do, decent art. Like, not really. But, especially right here. But I realized my gift or my talent was in, creating a story. So the whole point, the takeaway from all this, is you have to discover what is your gift. That's the fun part. What is your gift? What can you do to make the world a better place? Or make the world worse? In terms of, like, you see the great, horrible people in history. To name a few, you got Hitler, you got Stalin, so on. You got all these people who were somehow, given the ability to get into power. Hitler, extremely charismatic. Stalin, I believe he was also charismatic, but, he also capitalized on the whole revolution going in Russia. The list goes on and on. Chavez, Castro, all those people. They were people who seized opportunities to gain power, right? These were all people who used talents, who were very, good at something, and they used that to become evil. So again, it's the whole idea. We are all gifted, and whether we use it for good or evil. This is kind of like an analysis on what is the human condition, Are we all inherently evil? Are we all, and like the whole idea is that the concept of, will your gift define you? I think I went on a tangent here, but I think it was good. Will your gift define you? Like, let's say Hitler. He discovers that he has a gift for talking, conversation. If you discovered that you can influence people through your words, would you instantly become a dictator? I don't think so. I don't think most people go through those thought processes, but Hitler did. So it kind of just shows that, like, was it your gift or was it just you? As of right now, I obviously went on a big tangent talking about how the history is definitely changed and will be exaggerated. And since I went this far, I will make this into 2 parts. So here it goes.